Why is no one talking about the Nikon Z6 even in 2025? I've had this camera for more than 3 years now, and it's quite a budget-friendly mirrorless camera by Nikon. And one of the things I love about it is that it also performs fairly even in video production. So today we're just going to be reviewing this Nikon Z6 and see if it's still worth buying even in 2025. So without further ado, let's get started. The Nikon Z6 is obviously not the best camera in the market. As a matter of fact, it doesn't perform really well like my Nikon D800 in some areas. But does that mean that this camera is not worthy even in 2025? I beg to differ, but today we're just going to look at what my personal experience is about the Nikon Z6 as a photographer and at the same time as a videographer, and what area I think this camera thrives even now and what area I think is not doing so well. The first thing we're going to look at is the build quality. This is a mirrorless camera. It looks really simple in design. The grip is good enough for photography, and if you have a battery grip added to it, it gives you more flexibility when it comes to how you can hold it and use it. The design is simple. It has a flip up screen, which in a way is really good. It comes with a 3.5mm mic input and also an headphone input to monitor your audio. It has the mini HDMI and a USB-C to charge and also for file transfer. The battery it uses is the same Nikon battery, which is EL15, the normal Nikon battery, and it performs really well in battery life. The LCD is a bit bigger than the Sony FX30 or the Sony A7 Mark IV or the general Sony LCD screen. It has a touch screen and the navigation is quite easy. One of the things I noticed when I got this camera was that you have a separate control for the camera and also a separate control for the photography, and I love the fact that you can still use your FX lenses on the Z6 and other Nikon mirrorless, but if you want to get the best out of these Z cameras, it makes sense to buy the Z lenses, and that is where my problem is because those lenses are really expensive, but that's not what we're looking at right now. So the overall build quality is good. I'll give it to Nikon. The build quality, the design, and everything looks really nice. Let's now talk about the performance. As a photographer, I've used the Nikon Z6 for studio works. I discovered that the Z6 struggle to focus in low light situations, in area where Nikon D800 actually performed really well. This will give you a 24 megapixels at 12 frames per second, which is good enough for event photography, and the dynamic range is cool. The color science is Nikon, so you expect nothing but excellent. I love Nikon as a photographer. In the area of photography, this camera performs really well. The image quality is quite reasonable when you are shooting wedding, for example, because you probably would have to take a lot of pictures, and unlike the D800 where a picture would be around 70 megabytes, this will give you just 20 to 24 megabytes. But there is also a problem in that, because what I noticed is that while taking picture with this camera and in post-production, if you would need to crop, you would have a lot of problem, and the noise it gives in low light or when you try to push the ISO too far is terrible. So those are the reasons why, for me, it's not a camera I would go out with every day for a job. It doesn't mean I can't still make good use of it, but it's just not that reliable enough for me to take out, because I've experienced the D800 and D800 appears to be my standard for photography, and the Z6 didn't perform that much compared to D800 when it comes to image quality. But aside that, I think this camera is good enough for photography if you don't push it beyond the normal ISO, and depending on the glasses, the lenses you have is also going to be a determining factor. So for photography, the camera is good enough to do most of your photography work. Even in 2025, the image quality you get is good. But when you start comparing it to camera like the D800, then you start seeing a lot of flaws in image quality. In most cases, when I go out with my D800 and I mistakenly overexpose, I am able to recover most of those images, but if I do that with the Z6, I mostly won't be able to recover those images. When it comes to battery life, this guy manages battery really well. For photography, you don't need more than one battery per day, but just to be on the safer side, have an extra battery in your pocket, so if the battery dies, you can quickly switch that one. But in most cases, I don't need more than a single battery to power myself in a day. Now let's talk about the video performance, which is why I'm talking about this camera today. When I got the camera, I bought it for photography. I wanted a smaller body that still performs with smaller file sizes, and Z6 was what my budget could actually get in the Nikon line. And on getting it, trying it out for 1 or 2 jobs, I discovered that I am much more comfortable using my D800. This does not negate Z6. I'm just comfortable with my D800. But when I bought it and I was exploring it, I tried the video performance and I was blown away. I think the video is a bit underrated because a lot of people don't talk about the video performance. If you're using the old DSLR lenses, the autofocus struggles a bit. And as a result of that, you tend to get a lot of noise coming in when the camera struggles to focus, which is quite understandable. But by the time you are able to buy the Z lenses, the autofocus would improve. Now to the image quality, you're able to shoot in flat profile, and shooting in flat profile means that you can do a lot of workings in post-production. You're not getting Nikon log, but the flat profile gives you that basic that you can increase the contrast, saturation and everything in post-production and use this to match with whatever camera you're matching with. And I've used it on several occasions and several times, and it worked as expected. It shoots 4K up to 30 frames per second and 1080p to 120 frames per second. So if you are not after shooting in log and working in post-production, if you just want to create content for YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, this is good enough because the Nikon color science is excellent and it records 8-bit, which means that you won't be able to do a lot of post-production if you're not shooting in log profile. Why worry about all of that? But this is my own opinion, and because of my experience with the camera, I feel it still works and it still gets the job done. For the video production, when recording, you can only record 29 minutes and the camera will stop and you have to press the record again. Depending on what you're doing, if you're creating content like podcast that is longer, you have to be mindful of that. Now let's talk about the magic of this camera. If you have Atomos Ninja and you connect it to this camera, it opens you up to ability to shoot Nikon log. This exposes the camera to more dynamic range, and then you'll be able to record in 10-bit and work in post-production with Nikon log. Like I said, most of the time you won't want to go that far in the process of getting an additional device to record externally, but even the internal recording is good enough. I've used this on several occasions. There was never a time this camera disappointed me when it comes to overheat. It records really well. The image quality is good. I'm happy with what I got. It's not, yes, the perfect camera out there for hybrid, but it still has its place, especially depending on what kind of content you create. I think if you're just a run and gun person who does not care much about post-production, then this is a good deal for you. So for photographers, this is a good start. This is really, really good to have. If you intend to crop in post, then this might not be a good option for you. But if you are a wedding photographer and you just want something that is as clean as possible in low light, I think this is good for me. I've used it to cover weddings. I've used it to cover different kinds of events. My opinion is that depending on your budget and what you intend to achieve, I think Nikon Z6 is not dead. It's still something you can pick up and still get excellent results. Always remember, your camera would not have so much to do for you if your skill set is not improved. So if I'm in your shoes and I'm on a budget to get a camera that I can just use for now, then it's a good way to start with Nikon Z6 if I already have some lenses from my Nikon line. So I won't have to bother myself about lenses, because that was my experience. I had up to 10 lenses from Nikon and I just couldn't change to any other brand, so I had to stick to Nikon. And I'm happy that it's reduced how many times I had to take out my D800, which implies that it plays some roles which my D800 used to play, and that's the primary objective. So depending on what you want and depending on what your budget is, Nikon Z6 is still a good one, and I mean the Nikon Z6 Mark 1. We have the Mark II and the Mark III right now, which are even more fantastic cameras. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more of it, kindly subscribe. And would you be willing to buy the Nikon Z6 even in 2025 or beyond? Let's know in the comment section. Until I come your way next time, bye for now.